Hi, welcome to Wendy Goes Deep. I am Wendy, and today's episode is a rebroadcast from a live room over in the Wendy Goes Deep Clubhouse on the Clubhouse app. Hope you enjoy. Welcome to Wendy Goes Deep. I am Wendy, and I'm a microdosing and ADHD coach, as well as an orgasm and neuro pleasure coach. And while I'm knowledgeable about a wide range of topics related to health, well-being, psychedelics, sex, orgasms, business, and transformation, I am not a licensed professional in any of these areas. That is by choice. Any information discussed is for educational entertainment purposes only and it should not be taken as medical, mental health, legal, business, or any other kind of advice. Any discussion of psychedelics in this room on this podcast is purely for informational and harm reduction purposes. Please be aware that the use of these substances is illegal in many parts of the world, and I do not condone or encourage the use of illegal substances or illegal activities. Also, please be advised that some of the content discussed in this room may not be suitable for all listeners, particularly those who are under 18 or who may be triggered by discussions of sex or trauma, because those do often come up because this is a conversation and trigger warnings are not always given. So be aware of that. I encourage you to use your own discretion when deciding to whether be a part of this room. And with that being said, let's get into today's topic. So this was brought up uh, today by a friend about, it was actually specifically about the neuroscience of losing love, like for breakups. And today we are approaching the full moon in Leo, and Valentine's Day is also this week. And I thought this would be a really good conversation to talk about actually the neuroscience of love and also losing love. So I also want to, for those who do not know and are maybe listening to this on the podcast, I am actually in Clubhouse right now live. And so there will be a bit of a conversation here. And for whoever chooses to join in on the conversation, and if you're listening on to the replay, then you know where you're at. All right. So I love neuroscience and I love like talking about this. And I think it kind of makes a little bit sense to first talk about what maybe love is, and then why it's so difficult when we lose it. And as I kind of briefly said, we're approaching the full moon in Leo, not new moon in Leo. And I want to kind of touch on that because this is super prevalent in my coaching practice. So yesterday I spent hours in phone calls and in meetings, emergency phone calls, emergency meeting for a same theme that comes up. And only the people that were in my microdosing program where we discussed this were actually really aware of this. So the full moon in Leo is Leo is really about self-worth. I know a lot of people have their own different ways to describe it. Self-worth is the word that I use to encapsulate the energy around Leo. And so at this time of year, and as I said, it was very prevalent yesterday, even for people who were not even aware of this. What the full moon means is that we're shedding light on that theme for that zodiac sign. And whether or not you are conscious about your intentions that you set around the new moon. So the new moon in Leo was last year, August 4th, 2024. And whatever intentions you set then, either consciously or subconsciously, over the next 6 months, you will be taking actions that are aligned with bringing awareness into what is holding you back from those intentions. And so since it's around self-worth, those aspects are going to be really prominent. And as we are approaching Valentine's Day, for those that celebrate it, or at least are being present with the marketing, whether or not you even acknowledge it, you are probably being bombarded with Valentine's Day marketing. So there is this kind of subconscious and maybe conscious awareness around love and what it means to be in love, and when you're in your worth. And that is a really important concept in understanding when we are actually talking about what we are today, which I'm really talking about romantic love. So romantic love usually involves one or more people, whether or not you're monogamous or not, will depend on the number. And when you're dealing with other people, so there's going to be social components to it, there's going to be relational components to it, and there are going to be biological components to it, and emotional components to it, and mental components to it. And I like to break everything down into those energies, the physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, and social aspects of it. So let's go into the neuroscience part, which is the physical part. I find this the easiest parts to talk about because there's, research on it, and it's less emotional, actually. And that's because that's the harder part. So biologically, when we are in the presence of other people, the first thing that is happening is we are scanning for whether or not we are safe. And depending on your past experiences, you will either be practiced with the way someone is presenting themselves, or you will not be practiced with the way someone is presenting themselves. And in particular, their nervous system. We co-regulate with other people's nervous systems. So when you are with someone, if they are dysregulated, they will be reflecting their own skills and capabilities of how they handle people who are dysregulated. If you're if the other person or people are dysregulated, then you will be reflecting how you work with other people's dysregulation, and also your own skills and capabilities with being regulated. And that is basically what relating is. Through that process of nervous system regulation, we get all different kinds of neurochemical processes that happen. The more we are regulated with someone, we get the quote unquote feel good neurotransmitters being produced, such as serotonin, dopamine, and then the neuropeptides like oxytocin. A lot of times you hear oxytocin talking about being the love hormone. It's not. It is and it isn't. Love is a complex topic. And if you have to put a neurotransmitter to it, I actually wouldn't pick oxytocin. Oxytocin is about bonding, but that bond can be good or bad. So there's a lot of research that shows when you give oxytocin in a nasal form, in a chemical nasal form, and you give it to people who have a healthy, a more healthy dynamic, it strengthens their bond. But if you are giving them oxytocin and they do not have a healthy dynamic, meaning, I'm just going to say, if you hear me use terms like healthy, I'm really thinking of being regulated together. If they're dysregulated together, maybe I'll switch to that terminology to make it easier. So if you give oxytocin to people who are good at co-regulating together, reducing stress together, that oxytocin shot will increase that bond of co-regulation. However, if you give oxytocin to people who are dysregulated, you will increase that dysregulated bond. And as an orgasm and neuropleasure coach, I will tell you that this plays out repeatedly. People who maybe often use sex as a way to bond, depending on the way that they regulate their nervous systems when they are not engaging in sex, will actually be heightened when they engage in sex. Because when you engage in sex, and in particular when you have an orgasm, but it's not just through orgasm, skin to skin touch. So the more you increase skin to skin touch, you are increasing oxytocin, and therefore you are strengthening the way in which you bond. If you are only able to bond through physical touch and contact, you will keep needing that physical touch and contact to co-regulate. If you are touching and say like you're sitting next together on the couch, since we're talking about Valentine's Day, love languages get brought up a lot. So let's say your love language is acts of service, or actually, what's the other one I'm thinking of? Quality time. Say both you and your partner or partners have quality time as one of your love languages, and you participate in quality time a lot, and you sit next to each other and you co-regulate to each other and you are touching each other, you will be increasing your oxytocin. If you're spending your quality time sitting in chairs in opposite sides of the room watching TV, you probably are not increasing your oxytocin, but you are co-regulating. So you can see already like dynamics change. The neuroscience of every person is so individualistic, and all the activities that you engage in are going to either increase or decrease it. I only just touched on oxytocin. There's serotonin, there's dopamine, there's all these other components to the neuroscience of love. Serotonin often gets a lot of notoriety because we talk about like SSRIs, and a lot of times in the talks of psychedelics, as a microdosing coach, this gets brought up a lot. People focus on serotonin, but from what I know and understand with the body, serotonin is less about feeling good, but more about the neurotransmitter that is produced when things are going well in the body. So when I think, and I'm going to diverge a little bit here, but because we were talking about the neuroscience of love, it's all related. When the research is out on like SSRIs or even microdosing, because that's why I am often interested in it, but I'm also interested on the SSRI part. I wanted to give a really quick caveat here for people who might be listening on the replay or on the podcast who do not know this about me. I am not anti-medicine. I am a big proponent of medicine that works for you, but I don't think that the medical establishment, and in particular SSRIs are, did I say that correctly? SSRIs are the end all be all. And we know that they were developed a long time ago, and they are a very useful tool when they work, just like a knife is a very useful tool when it's needed. A hammer is useful, a saw is useful, a screwdriver is useful. All tools are useful when they are useful and can be harmful when they are not. And I look at SSRIs that way, but unfortunately, the medical community does not have a lot of tools available in the form of medicine that they can quickly prescribe to someone in the 10 minutes or 15 minutes when they're having a discussion with their patient, and be able to confidently let them leave the door feeling like they've gotten some help and support. Right. So how SSRIs work, they work by allowing this neurotransmitter serotonin to either be produced and also prevent what's called the reuptake, meaning the breakdown and the processing of, so you've got MAOIs that actually work on slowing down, inhibiting the breakdown of the serotonin. And so therefore the SSRIs prevent the reuptake, so that serotonin gets broken down and then it gets reuptake into the body and reprocessed. So SSRIs prevent that reuptake process. MAOIs prevent the breakdown of serotonin. Both of them allow serotonin to be floating around in the body. And as I just mentioned, the signaling factor of serotonin is basically saying if there's a lot of serotonin, it's saying everything is good. However, if you are artificially introducing this signaling saying that everything is good, you are basically silencing the rest of the body's signals to tell you what is wrong. And so while that is a very good thing to happen for short-term relief, it is not a long-term solution. So how does this relate to love? It all relates to love. So if you, when you are experiencing like new love, your body will get into another neurotransmitter right now, will increase the production of what's called dopamine. If you are not new to me, you know that I have ADHD and I talk about ADHD, and most of my clients have ADHD. So it is my wheelhouse because dopamine is one of the neurotransmitters that's focused on when it comes to ADHD, because most people with ADHD symptoms have are traditionally that comes with low dopamine. There are different pathways for dopamine, and one of the pathways will, if you have low dopamine, a lot of times the pathway that gets where the dopamine will travel then less down will indicate ADHD, but there's other pathways of dopamine. And so it's kind of this all the same process, whether or not it's ADHD symptoms, or you're very klutzy, or you have low progesterone and hormonal issues, you have low libido. There's all these different um, indicators of low dopamine. But what dopamine does is basically is the repeat molecule. So a lot of times it's called the pleasure molecule. It is not the pleasure molecule, because if it was the pleasure molecule, there are lots of activities that people engage in that increase dopamine, and they do not experience pleasure, but they will repeat it over and over again, even though it's not pleasure. But one of the things that kind of gets paired a lot with the activities that increase dopamine are um, little mini moments of accomplishment. So accomplishment is pleasurable. Dopamine does not equate pleasure. Dopamine means replete. Accomplishment, feeling like you served a purpose, even if that purpose is, say, for example, gambling and you win, that is a sense of accomplishment. Getting ready for a date and imagining all the things that could go well gives a sense of accomplishment. So a lot of times the accomplishment that we experience with these dopamine actually are in our mind and not actually something we are experiencing in real life. Right. So dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin. So dopamine is increased when you are having a new experience with someone, because it's called novelty. And when you're experiencing something new, you have a heightened emotional state. And anytime there is a heightened emotional state, that's acetylcholine, that's another neurotransmitter. It's a signal to the brain to pay attention. And so we do the dopamine to repeat the behavior. And especially if dopamine and serotonin are both increased at the same time. So when you are engaging in a new experience, like love, like, ooh, those fleeting, it's not even love at that point. It's like, oh, this is new. This feels good. And maybe you're talking with someone and you are co-regulating together because you guys have similar ways of co-regulating that will start to feel very good in your body. So you will be producing both serotonin and dopamine. And then because you are co-regulating with someone, you will be increasing oxytocin. So you will be bonding. And so it's kind of, love is really this, and there's norepinephrine in there. It's really this like concoction of all these different neurotransmitters in a way that feels safe and comfortable to you in that moment. All right. I think I kind of went over the basic neurotransmitters of it. So that's kind of what love is. So love is basically this concoction of dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin, and others as well. I can get into all of them, but another one that's an important one there is anandamide. Anandamide is actually the bliss molecule, and that is the one that I would call the pleasure molecule. This is released when you different things, but like orgasm is one of the natural ways in which you can release anandamide. There are other neuropeptides like what's the one I'm trying to think of? The one endorphins. So endorphins are neuropeptides that reduce pain sensations in your body. So one might equate endorphins of reducing pain as pleasure. It's technically not pleasure, it's just reducing pain, whereas anandamide is actually pleasure. So when you are doing activities such as, like, say, kissing, touching, reducing oxytocin, you're being in the moment when you are not feeling stress. So a lot of times the activities that we engage in with our lovers, we are not focused on our stress. So we're not necessarily needing the endorphins to reduce pain. We are able to engage some of the other processes to increase anandamide. One of the psychedelic compounds that increases anandamide or binds to the anandamide receptors is cannabis. So cannabis gets thrown around a lot and I think is one of the reasons why it gets used a lot is because it binds with that anandamide receptor. And so it gives the appearance that we are experiencing pleasure in our body, even though our body might actually be in a lot of pain and not actually be experiencing pleasure. So I know I'm getting all convoluted. It's just because there's so many things that are coming through in this little discussion that I'm having with myself to the question, the original question. So
just quickly, anandamide, like it interacts with the endocannabinoid system, and I think that's why as well, and not just because of just cannabis,
no, I
but
know.
the endocannabinoid system in our bodies. And just you're talking just about romantic love, right?
Well, you're kind of jumping in the conversation a little bit. I went
Sorry.
through. It's okay, because I went through oxytocin, I went through serotonin, I went through dopamine. I talked about a little how I kind of talk on physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, and social energy systems. And right now, I was focusing specifically on physical, and specifically on a bit of the neuroscience of it. I can completely go into endocannabinoid and how endocannabinoid is the system that links up the enteric nervous system with the central nervous system, because the enteric nervous system is more of a closed system, so the digestive system. So the enteric system speaks with the digestive. The digestive is what is closed. Sorry. The digestive system is really a closed system, like from mouth to anus. The enteric uh, nervous system is what connects the digestive system to the rest of the body, and the way the enteric nervous system really communicates through the rest of the nervous system is through the endocannabinoid system. And then the endocannabinoid system lets the brain know whether or not the digestive system is good. So basically, that's what the endocannabinoid system is, basically to let us know whether or not things are good or not in our body. So the term homeostasis is thrown around a lot. I I have a little bit of a problem using it because the way it's used a lot when people talk about it, they say balance, and it kind of gives this impression of flatline, but there's nothing in the body that is flatlined unless you're dead. And so what balance just means is a constant flow of energy moving around. All right. So um, I know I just wanted to address what you said there, and in case any questions came up. So talking about the neurotransmitters and the neuroscience, obviously this could be a full, long, deep discussion that could go for, you know, a 12-week course if we wanted to. But for the purpose of today's discussion, I'm kind of going to leave it with just the neurotransmitters, and know that the neurotransmitters are the signaling that then connect to the endocrine system, which send out the hormones, would then connect to all of our organs. All right. So with that being said, going back to love, we are always having all of these different neurotransmitters being kind of going at different times. If your body stops making dopamine, you will die, because dopamine is required. One of those pathways, for example, is a pathway that keeps our muscles moving. So, like, if your heart's not moving, you're going to be dead. So just know that that's why we say low dopamine, low serotonin. And we use the word low because there you will never be no. And so there's optimal production that kind of equates to feeling good and easily being able to navigate from dysregulation back into regulation. And then there is unoptimal, where you are staying in more dysregulation. So when we're talking about the neuroscience of love, really what we're talking about is this concoction of all these different neurotransmitters that cause all of these chemical processes in our body and all these different sensations in our body that are leading us to regulation. That is what the body is always trying to get back to. It is always trying to go from dysregulation back into regulation. And when we are with people that help us feel regulated, we kind of get addicted to it because we will make dopamine to repeat the behaviors that keep us engaged in that way of co-regulating with these individuals. And we then equate that with love. And I'm not saying love is made up. It's real. These are real sensations and feelings that you're experiencing in your body. This biology is real, and different people will bring out these different sensations in your body. So that kind of moves us into emotions. So emotions are the bridge between our body and our mind, our kind of our thoughts and feelings about it. So we have the sensations, meaning what we actually are experiencing in our body, that, and we use the word feelings interchangeably with our thoughts. So our feelings are more of our thoughts, or they could be in the body, but I find that most of the people, when they're using the word feelings, they are talking about their words about what they are experiencing. And so, but our emotions are actually biological. And when we experience, and there's really only 7 emotions that we experience, and then we have thoughts about the combinations and the levels of the different emotions that we and um, the outward environment in which we are experiencing those emotions, and we create stories around it. And together, that all is what we call love. So when we are with another person and we are feeling good in our body and we're having those chemical reactions and we are co-regulating and we feel, at peace, we often feel that as love. Or sometimes it's not even peaceful, but it's familiar and therefore feels less, subconsciously feels less scary. We equate it with love. And when that goes away, the way in which we co-regulate, especially when you are relying on another individual to help you co-regulate. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with that. We are meant as humans to co-regulate with other people. So having the feelings of being in love, being with other people and co-regulating together in ways that are pleasurable is what we are meant to do. And when that goes away, it is super dysregulating. We will, our dopamine levels change and shift, and what pulls up our dopamine, the oxytocin levels change and shift, and our serotonin levels change and shift. And chances are you're not engaging in activities that are building anandamide, the actual bliss molecule. And so it might be easy to turn to other substances or other activities that will help you bring back either the endorphins to reduce the pain that you're experiencing, or increase anandamide, or increase serotonin, or increase dopamine. And we will engage in those activities, any of them. And we might even find ourselves grasping for those other activities because our bodies are now dysregulated, because the ways that when we're in loving relationships, or, what I kind of was talking about, and relationships that help us regulate our nervous system, we we can rely on them and depend on them. We do that whether or not we want to or we're even conscious of it. We do that with people that maybe are good for us or maybe are not good for us, for our longer term objectives. And when that goes away, it feels devastating and there is a disruption and it is dysregulating. And we need to find other ways to regulate if that opportunity to regulate is gone. Sometimes it's because, of communication or social pressures or, you know, whatever other things. Sometimes it's because the person dies and we have now lost our main way of co-regulation. Sometimes the person goes away, whether, incarceration, or maybe they get sick and they have an illness and now they're not able to be the way that we were able to co-regulate. And we are having to discover all of this on our own. And this is when community is super actually important. And, yeah, I'm gonna pause for a moment and ask if anyone has any questions or anything. And I'm also going to take a drink of water at this moment. So, and you can raise your hand and come on up and join the discussion. And let me take my sip of water and unmic if you feel called to.
Hey, Wendy, Rachel here. Lovely to catch you. I'm on the road, so hopefully it's not too noisy. I obviously am just stepping in, but in this moment about the co-regulation, but like, it's funny because I feel like I'm now into my community I have been in community space with people in physical form, but I'm just kind of more in it and also in it in a different way. Like maybe people are less, yeah, they're not just in the bracket, in the healing space, more broad. And it's funny because like, oh my God, my system is so interesting because my system was like, sure, I like this co-regulation, it's really interesting, but at the same time, there's some medicine in it. So I find it always really interesting going into different groups because there's like that one response of like, this isn't the nervous system that I want to be around, or my nervous system doesn't want to need, or then it's like, but actually maybe my system, I often feel like my system is the system that they regulate too. And that somehow annoys me a little bit because I'm like, why? Because so many people are so dysregulated now. They're just so like, they don't know how to regulate. So that's my awareness at the moment that I'm just like, do I want to be in these spaces? How are they affecting me again? And yeah, so I'm just going to leave that there because it's not a question, but it's definitely an informed experience more.
Hey, Masha, I love your dysregulated sound. That was great. Thank you.
Thank you for coming up. And yes, the dysregulation is, is the thing that I see. And as a coach that helps people like learn how to regulate their nervous system and actively works on it, I definitely walk my walk as much as I possibly can. I also know how hard it is when you're around really dysregulated people and how hard it is to keep showing up regulated when other people are not. And it's tiring and exhausting. And so I want to acknowledge that and and commiserate with you. And then I want to mention something here in the comments. So he had said, I was on SSRIs fairly high dose when I met my husband. I came off them in January, February. And my marriage started to break down in August. I was just wondering if the SSRIs masked signals that things weren't okay. And coming off them made me more aware of how I was feeling. And I will say, yes, this is, as a microdosing coach, I mostly work with people with ADHD, but I don't only work with people with ADHD. And I'm going to use right now some of my clients' stories, with caution, because there's multiple of them that have the same. And so I'm going to use the ones that that weren't on ADHD medications so I can speak specifically on SSRIs without the added layer of ADHD medications as well. And the awareness of the fact that there's two parts to it. So number one, whatever was there before you got on the SSRIs, like whatever the reason was that, spurred the process to get on the SSRIs. And for those joining late in the room, I did mention I'm not anti-SSRIs. I think they're super powerful. They're a great short-term solution. That's still there unless you actively work to process whatever was leading up to needing the SSRIs. So whatever the dysregulation, the trauma, the whatever the experiences are that led into that, they're still there and they still have to be processed. And when you start weaning off of SSRIs, if you have not processed them, they're going to come up. And you're going to have to, because your body wants, as I keep saying over and over again, your body wants to move from dysregulation to regulation. And that process involves moving the energy that was created during times of stress out of your body. And your body, your mind, your spirit, your symphony of cells, Jordan, will work together to move that energy out in the ways that it knows how. And so when you taper off of SSRIs or come off of SSRIs, all of the things that most people avoid while they're on SSRIs, because they do not have to now, they're not even aware to face them anymore. They're not aware to face the stress, because stress and pain is a signal of something that needs to be processed. And when you're not processing that and you're not getting the signals to process it, you're usually not. And so before, just as a method to my madness, when I am working with someone, we don't even start the tapering process or microdosing process until we start developing practices that help them become comfortable with sensations arising in their body, comfortable with having difficult conversations with their spouses, because in multiple of them, not all of them, in multiple situations, they were married. And it's important that they have these kind of practices in place before they come off the SSRIs, because things are going to come up. And if they don't already have a good process to talk through things that come up, you're now going to have no choice but to face you're going to be feeling everything that you've been masking with the SSRIs. So there's that part. And then with the I like microdosing as a tool to help with this process, but it's microdosing. Just saying microdosing is not the end all be all. It's the process to do it. Now, you can find the right substance and protocol that will help you, and especially if you already have those tools in place. And so I think that answered your question, or answered your I don't know if there was a question in it. Hopefully that did. You can either unmic if you feel comfortable, or you can drop it in the chat if you do not want to unmic. If you can. And if anyone has anything else to say on it, you can jump in. Like Jordan, I know you have a book on microdosing coming up very, very soon. So maybe was there anything about love in your microdosing book?
Well, in a sense that when you think about the three big benefits of microdosing, three big categories, one is physical and mental health conditions. One is enhanced wellness performance in the flow, but the third is really increased communication, both between your own symphony of selves inside of you and with other people in your world. So, for example, in the little bit we have about, are people really having better sex if they're microdosing? We say, yes, we're getting those reports, but it's mainly because relationships are nicer and people are, we don't say this exactly, but it is so that they're co-regulating better with each other. And that's what leads to more physical, embracing and tomfoolery, as it were. So I think that microdosing really does bring everybody back to equilibrium. I mean, we have, when you look deeply into the word equilibrium, you find out that everybody defines it their own way. So what does it really mean? You're being drawn back into a more healthful way of all of your systems operating with each other in ways that serve you. And that's what we find seems to happen when people microdose, especially in a conservative way. And sometimes it's, with a coach or therapist, if that's the kind of person they are. And so I think that you really do, you have, on the part about just yourself, you're more aware that you have different selves and you're more able to coordinate them and know which one is up and know why in some cases you're not going to want to let one of yourselves have the stage, as it were, too long. I had a thing like that a couple of weeks ago where I was just like crying uncontrollably. And after a little bit of time, I reminded myself that I still had a lot of stuff to get done and I might as well turn what had happened into a creative outpouring and get busy and move my body and do all those things. So I did that. And that part of me, after it got to fully feel its feelings, it basically went back into the audience after it felt like it was heard. So you've got that going on with yourself. And then, what we've always said about multiple selves is that one of the great advantages of knowing that everyone else in your life has selves is that when they do something that pisses you off in real time or is really weird, unless it's, crazy over the top, you really never want to be in the same room with them again. You can remind yourself that this is just one part of who they are. This isn't all of who they are. And they might have parts that don't work well. And they might have, we don't like the mental illness monikers very well. And just instead say that people have a dysregulated self system and they're, one part of them is not aware what the other part is doing. And they're saying things that are confusing people and they're not being consistent in their actions. And so once you kind of get that control, everybody can always control which part of who they're in and what they're doing. It's a lot easier to be passionate and to give people second chances. And that doesn't always happen. I've had a fight with someone who's been a service leader to me for 20 years, and I don't think we can come back from it. And I think it's better that way now that I look at it. So, yeah. Thanks for asking me, Wendy.
I love that. And thank you so much for your wisdom and your insights, because I learned so much from you, and I'm always appreciative of everybody's shares, actually. All of it, all of us, we all.
Well, I think we all learn from each other, although I have to admit that sometimes when the science starts going fast and you start talking about transmitters, I'll go back like a step and ask, Google or Wikipedia, what is a neurotransmitter? I need to sometimes remind myself on that very basic level. We use these words all the time and so much. And then I like to and that's why I'm reading that book on electricity by Sally Adi, We Are Electric. And, there was for a long time huge disagreements whether there was a kind of bioelectricity that actually flowed through human beings and how it worked, and then what neurons were and how they communicated. So we're still on a learning curve on that. We don't at all have all the information in on what we as electrical beings are and how different parts of us and different cells in particular and neurons in particular communicate with each other. So it's really nice to be in these spaces with you because I know you have such an incredible thirst for knowledge and soak it up and really So I always learn from you.
Aw, thank you. Yeah, I know. I try to bring it back every so often and be like, okay, just as a reminder, neurotransmitters are the basically brain's way of sending signal to the endocrine system. So then the endocrine system can tell all the organs, what to do.
Well,
And
so
yeah.
a neurotransmitter, right, is a chemical that is released by the axon of one neuron and picked up by the dendrites of others. And there's like 8 or 10 or 12 main different ones. Is that right?
So this is where it starts getting complicated. So kind of the transmission of neurotransmitters is what you explained that correctly. So what's interesting about neurotransmitters, a lot of times in science, everything kind of gets, a lot of things get clumped together. So I kind of mentioned neuropeptides. So like oxytocin is technically not a neurotransmitter, it's a neuropeptide, right? Did I get that one? Oxytocin is one. Some are neurotransmitters, some are neuropeptides. And it kind of just depends on where the end point is. So when it comes to neurotransmitters, the end point is a neuron. And so it's still working within the nervous system. When it's just staying within the nervous system. When the end point is a neuron that is attached to the endocrine, to an organ, it's a neuropeptide. And then when there's another I can't remember what the other one is called. Sorry, my brain is not remembering, but there's another one too. And it depends on how the end attaches. But when you're talking about from neuron to neuron with the dendrites, the neurotransmitters, that's how they move through the nervous system, is from the one end, from the axon to the dendrite. And then but the end result determines whether or not it's a neurotransmitter or neuropeptide. And then that's a lot of science. And so it's just easier to say neurotransmitter for all of it. And so, but it's kind of the message. You can kind of think as the email running through the system and getting to an end result. So sometimes the email is just going from, or like maybe like it's not even the email. An email would be like a neuropeptide going to an organ. And then it's just like the words inside or the message.
Maybe you can help me through on this. Let's say help me understand the pathway of one, let's say serotonin molecule all the way through and how it ends up actually affecting how you feel. Like, how does that happen? That's where I really have no idea how things happen. Or maybe one.
So you picked serotonin, which is actually one of the more complicated ones because serotonin is made in both the brain and the digestive system. So if we're just going to be talking about from the brain, I'm better with dopamine.
Go ahead.
See, I'm just a little bit better with dopamine only because I can remember actually, no, all of it's super complex. I'm going to forget all the words to all the parts. Like I can see it in my mind, but I don't remember what they're called. And so like, I know the process. So like, everything's a circuit. So there's no like start to finish completely. Right. But when the dopamine is produced, which is and there's multiple places in which the dopamine is produced. There's just more for serotonin. So let's say when the dopamine is produced at the striatum versus the whatever necro thing. See, that's all I'm like, okay, let me see if I can pull up this is why I like writing my blog posts, because sometimes I use them as my guidelines, because then I can find the words. Let me pull up one of the posts that has it. Oh my gosh, I have an error on my website. Oops, I gotta fix that one. Is it this one? It might be this one. Okay, so cool. All right, so yeah, let me use the dopamine one because I know I have this written down. So there's 4 major pathways of dopamine: the mesocortical, the mesolimbic, the nigrostriatal, and the tuberofundibular. I'm never going to remember those names. I don't work with it every single day, right? So the mesocortical pathway goes from the front, the prefrontal cortex. So we talk about this a lot, right? So, excuse me. When we talk about like logic or central executive network, especially in ADHD, we talk a lot about like the CEN, executive network, executive functioning. We're talking about the prefrontal cortex. So it's the front part of your brain, and cognitive processes. It begins and ends in that pathway, right? So it's only staying within that pathway. Then you have the mesolimbic pathway, which goes from like with the limbic structures and the nucleus accumbens, the amygdala, and the hippocampus, and will also move out to the PFC, so the prefrontal cortex, to engage the reward system. But the mesolimbic pathway pretty much stays within the limbic structures, right? So like the beginning and end stays within the limbic structures, right? But they will often work together, the mesolimbic and mesocortical, and will move to different, which will cause different action. So like when you've got the HPA, so the hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal, right? If the dopamine is signaling in the mesolimbic pathway or the mesocortical pathway, will then trigger the hypothalamus to start making different neurotransmitters, primarily either cortisol or serotonin, to then, it will trigger the process for the pituitary gland to signal to the adrenal gland to make either cortisol or to keep production of serotonin. Do you see how complicated this gets? Right? And that's even with
way too complicated. I mean, I would need to really study this and see images and write it out. I could never remember all this stuff, so I'm impressed that you can.
Right. So I couldn't remember like mesolimbic and mesocortical right then when I was thinking about it. That's why I pulled up my blog post. So just FYI, a lot of times blog posts are for me, so I can pull up something when I need to remember it, because I'll remember which blog post it's in. But I didn't mention the HPA at all in that blog post, but it's just because I know that process. So yeah, that's why I like to just talk about things very generally and stuff, and why I use things like the physical energy system, because when you start getting into the complete neuroscience and all of it, it gets really complicated to talk about all the processes. But at the end of the day, we're talking about things that are happening in the body. And then when you start talking about then the emotions and how, and I don't even talk, I keep fascia separate usually, because fascia it's the physical connecting point to the emotional energy system. And then you have the mental energy system, which is uses the brain to talk to the mind, interacts with the brain first, and then signals emotions to then talk to the body to respond. It gets so complicated. So
Wendy, hi, Al here. Just wanted to come in and say it is very, very detailed, this level. And I think when I was sort of wondering about the neuroscience of love and losing love, and I was kind of, what I was reflecting on was the sort of nervous system state, maybe on a more macro level. So when I talk about that, I'm almost visualizing a sort of grid pattern in my body, that's sort of like in different kind of configurations and so on. And when I'm with someone else, their pattern, like what their nervous system state is in, either mine can influence theirs or theirs mine. And I think if you're close to somebody and you're in that sort of love relationship, it's almost like you tend to reflect each other's body state. This could maybe be at the level of mirror neurons, maybe. So at that sort of pattern macro level, our nervous systems seem to influence and dance with each other. And, maybe one person's taking the lead or the other one. And yeah, so yeah, I'm just sort of interested in your reflections on that level. I'm sure that only happens because of all the, machinations and goings on with the neurotransmitters beneath that. But yeah, that's kind of the level of which I'm interested in how the sort of maybe the social space or the mental space that you have with somebody influences how your nervous systems interact. Anyway, I'll leave it there.
Wow, I love it. So that actually leads us into you basically described the emotional energy system. And I love that you kind of had the knowing sense of almost like a grid, like over your body. So the fascia, for those who do not know, is a web-like structure that covers every single muscle, organ, everything in your body. It's like a web. And when you pull one string of the web, the entire system is affected. And that's, if you want to paint a picture, that is what we're talking about when we're talking about nervous system regulation. It is energy flowing through the fascia without being disrupted. So imagine that web where I'm going to paint a visual here. This is not necessarily science. This is about being able to paint a visual so that way you can kind of understand the science. So imagine all those you've got that nervous system with the electricity kind of flowing through. And we just kind of talked about the neurotransmitters, how it's like really, really complicated, but we can kind of picture an electrical grid pattern interweaving with muscles and bones, right? Now picture a web structure that's covering all of it, and energy is flowing through it. And maybe you can use a visual of like light moving along that web structure, just constantly just all along it. And when we are regulated, that energy is flowing really nicely and beautifully, and it's just easy and moving. And when we're dysregulated, it's like little clouds or bottlenecks or the web being pulled in different directions, and it's causing tension underneath. So like the muscles and the bones and that electric system is all responding to the web being kind of tightening up or restricting the movement underneath it. And that's our emotions. That's our emotional energy system. And our mind, our thoughts and feelings about the situation, about the person, are kind of putting restriction. Maybe they're putting restrictions on that web structure, or maybe our mind is allowing the energy to flow. And that is how our mind influences the body directly. It physically, it through different processes, it creates a constriction around that emotional energy flowing through our body. And when we are regulating with someone, and we are when we are co-regulating in a positive way, in a way that is allowing the energy to flow, it will feel good in our bodies. It will feel love. It will feel lovely. It will feel, we will feel connection. And because that energy is flowing. And when we are dysregulated, that energy will not be flowing well. And we will, and whatever the reasons why, whether it's something coming up from the body, influencing that energetic flow of the emotions, or whether it's something coming from the mind, influencing that. And when we're talking socially, there is a mechanism that will have our energetic, emotional energy flow try to synchronize with the other person's energetic, emotional flow. So that web-like structure of yours will be trying to synchronize with the web-like structure of the other person. And the easiest visual I can give this is, if you remember in science class along the way, learning about like waves, and how there might be like a big wave, like going up and down, up and down, up and down. And there's a small wave, short. And when they collide, they don't collide and just disperse. They kind of mesh together. And then the wave becomes smaller than the large wave and bigger than the smaller wave. And the frequency in which the wave moves will be in the middle. And that's what co-regulation is. And when you've got someone coming, and let's assign the small waves as regulated, but it could be dysregulated too. And then you have, actually, we'll have two types of dysregulation. You'll have small waves being dysregulated, maybe like avoidant behavior. And you have the big waves of being dysregulated, anxious behavior. And they're coming together, and then they merge in a way that actually feels good to both of them. It feels like co-regulation, and because it is a form of co-regulating. You guys are syncing up your energetic waves together, your emotional energy waves together in a way that feels good to both of you. But if someone is already coming in with the middle waves, feeling regulated, they're going to feel the dysregulation of the other person. And hopefully they have the tools and skills to stay in that regulated state, so the other person who's dysregulated can come to those middle waves, instead of the person with the middle waves maybe having to move into dysregulation, so that way they can co-regulate together, which is usually what most people are experienced with. Maybe someone who is very anxious, for example, thinking that those big waves, maybe they're regulated, they will move into a dysregulated, avoidant, the small waves, so that way the energy feels more even. And that is emotional energy, kind of in a visual nutshell, as much as possible, through audio. Did that help? Well, me? Or maybe you can't talk now. I know it's a busy time. Yeah. Oh, well, hopefully it helped.
Yeah, it did help. Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm gonna probably listen to it again, but yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It really does. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Yes, Jordan.
I was doing an order of magnitude check. That is, I realize I have no idea what the total amount of neurotransmitting that is going on, like at any given second of the body is. So I asked ChatGPT, and I see now that the conclusion, on average, each neuron really, and we have like 86 billion neurons in the central nervous system, releases millions to billions of neurotransmitter molecules per second. This massive activity enables thought, et cetera, and all that stuff. I mean, it's they start with a single synaptic vesicle contains thousands of neurotransmitter molecules. Each action potential releases several vesicles, typically to a few hundred. This means millions of neurotransmitter molecules can be released per second per synapse. So I know in a certain sense that this kind of big order of magnitude number thing doesn't really show anything. Like when I say, 1.54 quadrillion molecules of LSD in a single microgram, it doesn't really mean anything, but I'm just trying to get an understanding that there's like all of these neurotransmitters can be released at, in different amounts through all of the neurons. It's just like there's just so much going on at any given moment. Like it's unfathomable just how big it is.
I know. It's
86 billion neurons with 10,000 synapses, each of which can fire up to 100 times a second. That's fucking crazy. That's like 10 to the 15th to the 10 to the 18th of neurotransmitter molecules a second in the brain. It's just a huge number. So that doesn't add anything, but it just makes me trying to get a little sense of, it's like when you look at one of those maps of relative scale, and there was this great website that you could go all the way down to like the Planck level, and then all the way up to the size of the whole universe. And it took you through like what was a real thing on that level. And it's boggling.
Yeah, I agree. And it's one of the reasons why I really like to talk in the energy systems. And I find it useful to talk at that level because it becomes more visual, right? It becomes perceivable in the conversation, and it becomes useful. And it's not that I don't love science, because I love science and I love going into it, but uh, and it's also one of the reasons why I'm very I kind of nonchalantly disregard a lot of the conversations, especially in the psychedelic community, because when they focus too much on any one component, you've lost sight of the big picture, and there's
Absolutely.
no way you have the answer.
Jim is really big on not overplaying 5-HT to a receptor. He thinks that's way overblown. It's the place where they have a bit of a handle, so that's where all the focus is. But there's so much more going on.
Yeah, I mean, even like, for example, I'm going to use a non-illegal microdosing molecule that I work with people with, which is kava. So kava is known to increase serotonin and increase dopamine, right? Not to the levels necessarily of an SSRI, but it is known to do that, right? And so, right, just even when I was talking about dopamine, because I'm more familiar with dopamine, but it's not that I'm unfamiliar with serotonin or unfamiliar with norepinephrine or unfamiliar with oxytocin. Actually, I'm really familiar with oxytocin and anandamide, but usually in the conversations of this, and anandamide is not discussed pretty much anywhere except for in the cannabis conversations because of the endocannabinoid system. And then people also talk about endorphins and, all these different things. They aren't the answer. Like they are just a small component of a complex system that works within a system of systems of systems, which is who we are. And I find it less useful for the conversation that most people are actually after, which is what's going to help me feel better in my life. And I love going deep into the science. I will still keep going deep into the science because I think people feel better when they have a way to explain something. I mean, that's the way our brains are designed. We like feeling confident in our knowledge, and that gives us a sense of security and safety because anytime you can reduce uncertainty. So I understand the quest for wanting to reduce uncertainty, like in double-blind placebo-controlled studies, you're reducing uncertainty, but that's not the answer, and it is not the true magic in doing any of this work. The magic is always in finding ways to regulate the nervous system, because then the body knows exactly what to do when you're regulated. And that, to me, is where really the focus is. How do you get into nervous system regulation and stay there as much as possible, or come back to nervous system regulation as much as possible? And that's when healing and all of the things you talk about in microdosing, in your book, in Microdosing.
Well, would you agree with the notion that, in some sense, microdoses are like a vitamin pill in that they just generally tend to, overall, not in all cases, because of course you can have neuroplasticity that's not good neuroplasticity and imprint bad things and all that. But overall, microdoses bring people back to equilibrium and regulation, and they feel better, and so they can heal better or perform better or whatever it is. You think that's an overstatement, or is that fair?
I think it's in particular with microdosing compared to large doses, it is, if you look, like, once again, kind of like going through all these really complex different systems and thinking about what the molecules do. And you can see it very easily in large doses, but you're now starting to bring in other factors, and in particular, stress on the system, which causes dysregulation. When you are bringing it in smaller doses that are not causing stress on the body, you're actually allowing nervous system regulation. And that is why you see such broad benefits and throughout the board, across the board, but not, you can't pinpoint exactly why, because whenever you're helping someone to increase their nervous system regulation, you're increasing their health and well-being. That is how our bodies are designed. And to what level you are increasing that will depend on how dysregulated they are, the other tools that they have in their toolbox to regulate. If they are very, and I would argue that all illness, whether you're talking about mental or physical, it's all in the body, and it is all dysregulation. And it is spending too much time in dysregulation that causes all illness in the body of any kind. And anytime you can get your body into regulation, you're going to increase wellness of any kind. So did that answer it?
Yeah, well, I definitely agree with your point that large doses stress people out. So, all things equal, then there is some sort of, I'm going to use the word, magic mechanism in microdoses that bring people back to equilibrium and greater regulation. Then there's a greater chance that that can happen than if they're stressed out and they're not experienced and they're seeing visuals, or their heart is racing, or whatever's going on with somebody in a big trip. So by not starting out that way, I think that, and that's also why giving people time to off, like with the Fadiman protocol, and having that whole second day off, that's often where people report having the sort of the most knowledge and the best gains, because there's no load on their body at all. And yet they're still feeling a little different and, a little more energized and nicer and all those things. So I think we're on the same page.
We're definitely on the same page. And I think I'm on a page in your book.
Well, you're on at least 2 pages. You're on a page, you're in a footnote, and then you're in the acknowledgments. So, yeah.
So yes, we're on the same page.
We're on the same page. Well, I don't know if my name is on any of those pages, but that's great. And yeah, I just find that sometimes, like, I notice that I'm talking about things and I really don't have any idea what scale they're happening. Like, I guess I've known that there's that many neurotransmitters in any one person's body and brain at any given time, but I don't, it's too complicated to think about. So we rarely talk about it.
Yeah. I mean, even when you start going into cellular biology, I'll use this as an example. Cellular biology is a little easier to fathom than the nervous system, because, and even with that, people talk about mitochondria as if it's this one thing. So like we'll say neurotransmitter as if it's this one thing, or the nervous system as if it's this one thing. And nothing is just one thing in our body. Nothing. There's not one thing that is isolated.
Right. This is all our mental constructs trying to break things down and convince us that we can apply the process of material reductionism to the body, which actually defies that ultimately. And I love it when you talk about systems within systems and levels within levels. My old high trip guru Bill Eichmann was always talking about systems within systems and levels within levels. And it's hard to get it across, and it's hard to explain what's really going on in anything really in the body. It's so complicated. I feel like I'm jabbering, but you know what I mean.
I do. Yeah, because nothing is also linear. There's no start and end. It's just a recycling. We're just a big recycling center. Even all of these
I
things
thought
that
we were a big tube. Things come in the mouth and out the anus, and pretty much that's life.
yeah, we're the recycling, but even then, we're still a recycling center, right? Like a lot of things still, they stay in the center and they get like they're in the center, they get transformed, and then they leave the center, but new things are coming in, but they're still using some of the things that were already in the center. They're not getting rid of the machinery that's in the recycling center. They're not getting rid of all of the components that make up the recycling center. They keep utilizing it. And sometimes you use a paper clip, for one stack of papers, and then you don't necessarily always get rid of that paper. You don't throw that paper clip away. You use that paper clip away again in a different place.
So what do you think? Remember that movie? I think it was like 18 grams, and the premise was that when you die, your body is actually slightly a moment after death, and they've weighed people, and they actually weigh very slightly less, so that there might somehow be some type of physical, measurable component to what makes us alive and human. Or do you think it's sort of an energy pattern that exists and then at some point is fully broken by the body's inability to sustain it anymore at the moment of death, and it doesn't actually weigh anything? You can't ever capture it because it's not physical, it's energy.
Yeah, it's a system. It's not like you can't. I feel like it is a system. One of the things that I talk about how, like, when you see something, you can't unsee it, and this understanding of the entire body is the system of systems. And I like to simply put it, the 5 energy systems put together. And when that physical energy system endures too much stress that it can no longer connect the other energy systems together, that is when we die.
I like that. It's very straightforward and pragmatic.
Because that's how it,
Like you.
yeah.
Like you.
I mean, yeah. And then on that note, I'm noticing the time, so I'm gonna close out the room. But any last closing thoughts before I close the room? No?
Just thoughts. No.
No.
Just,
All right.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you, Eric, for being here. I thought you went through some good stuff today. I kind of want like an animation of how the whole body works in real time, where you can zoom in on any level of the physical or energy systems. Can you make that for me?
Yeah, in my spare time.
Good. I know you have a lot of spirit. All right. That's excellent.
Yeah, thank you everybody for being here. Thank you for whoever's listening on the replay or listening to this on the podcast. If you're listening on the podcast, I invite you to following along. Let's all take a big, deep breath in together. And now let's sigh or growl it out. Thank you, everybody. Ending the room in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Thank you for joining for today's episode. I hope you found the conversation interesting, maybe even a little inspiring. If you're curious about how to work with me or what I offer, you can check out my website, wendygoesdeep.com, to learn more about what it is that I do. And I'd like to take this opportunity to ask you for a little favor. Growing this community is only possible with support from people like you. If you could take a moment to like, subscribe, or maybe even share it with a friend, it helps more than you know. And until we can go deep again, stay curious and keep exploring.